وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. I know it's been a minute, but last time we had started talking about in what situations can an individual display his actions, right? When in a discussion of riyā, it's very important for us to understand that there are some times where it's completely reasonable for us to actually publicly do those actions. And what were some of those examples? If you guys remember? Right, to set an example, absolutely. What else? What are some other situations? Or is that the only one? Just to set an example? Let's talk about some of them. So there is definitely a benefit in general. If I have a choice between hiding my action or displaying it, what generally should we incline toward? Hiding, right? And that's something that's good, something that's healthy. It prevents us from falling into riyā. If we know 100% for sure that somebody isn't seeing what our action actually is. So over here, he gives the example of permission using Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement, إِن تُبْدُوا الصَّدَقَاتِ فَنِعْمَا هِيَ وَإِن تُخْفُوهَا وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاءَ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. If you give charity openly, it is good, but if you keep it secret and give it to the needy in private, that is better. So it's a discussion of good and better, but he's saying that if you give it publicly, it is good, right? So there's nothing wrong with it, something that's completely permissible, and he uses that example of something that is good, and because if it was bad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have stated it. There are two ways for us to actually ruin our actions. One of them is doing them publicly. The second way, which is less harmful, but it can start having an effect on our hearts, is if we brag about them afterward. So if I do an action sincerely, I make sunan, or I give money, or I perform some type of good deed, and I help someone in some way, I can brag about it afterward, right? So will that bragging have an effect on that action? No, right? Why? Because action is done, right? The action is done, and I might have been sincere at the time, and if I brag about it, but now this will actually have an effect on my heart. And there are some situations where we know that actions are public and we really don't have a lot of control over. But he uses some good examples here. He said there was an Ansari, he used to give dates publicly, and the people followed him after seeing that. Sometimes we need that initial push, to do a deed. And when we see someone doing that deed, what happens? Right, it's motivating, right? It's like, okay, you know what? If he can do it or she can do it, you know what? I think I can do it too. Sometimes there's like a tibbiness. Sometimes we don't always trust. If there's like a new charity organization that I'm not aware of, but I see 3 or 4 people donating to it, how does that make me feel? Right? It's like, okay, I can kind of develop trust with them too. I can trust them too. If these people are trusting them, I think that this is something that is trustworthy and I should take part in it. There are some actions that are only public. Like, so for example, Hajj. When I'm at Arafah or I'm in Mina and I'm wearing ihram, can I be like, oh no, I'm doing this privately? Like, there's some deeds like it's impossible to hide them. Or even if I'm praying in congregation and I come and I'm sitting for Jummah, I can't hide the fact that I'm there for Jummah, right? Or I'm there to pray. There are some deeds that are just inherently public. There are some deeds that we can't hide. The other example he uses is jihad, right? So if you're there and you're in the battle lines, like that's not something that can be hidden. But he's saying that in those situations, you do the best you can to make sure that your intention is pure. He says that there are things that are inherently private. So, for example, qiyam, right? Making tahajjud, making qiyam prayers. You can make them in private, but what if I'm praying really loudly? Right, so, right, if I'm home, right, and like I'm praying like really super loud, right? Like my wife and my kids, like maybe my neighbors, like they can hear. It's what is my intention behind doing that? Am I trying to get other people's attention so that they know that I'm praying? So these are things kind of for us to be aware of. And the acts that we do publicly, and the things that like we initiate ourselves, it's important while we're going through that process. So for example, if I'm getting ready to go to a class, right? Or if I'm getting ready to go for Salatul Jama'ah, or I'm getting ready to make Hajj, part of my preparation process that's argued here is what should I do, right? So when we come to the masjid, make sure I have wudu, right? Make sure that I'm dressed appropriately, right? So I prepare all these things. What is something else that should be part of the preparation process? right, my niyyah, right? I just need to make sure that that's part of the process when I'm going and I'm preparing, that, hey, listen, why am I doing this? For what reason? And just kind of asking myself to make sure that my niyyah is correct when I'm engaging. So he uses the example, and I think we had talked about this, those things that are strictly public. So jihad and hajj, these are strictly public actions. And you have to make sure that part of that preparation process is this niyyah. And part of that niyyah can be to encourage others. Right? Part of that niyyah can be to encourage others. So socially, what is very common when a person prepares for hajj? What are some of the things that we do? I'm sorry? You never been for hajj? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you. Yeah. Now, when you're getting ready and going for hajj, culturally, what are some things that people do? They ask for forgiveness, right? It's a very culturally common thing, right? Where you reach out to people and be like, hey, listen, I'm going for hajj. Right? So, I'm just seeking forgiveness before I go for hajj. Sometimes we share because they're like, hey, listen, can you make dua for me while you're there? Sometimes people have like real problems and real issues, and they put a lot of hope in your dua when you go. I mean, I know people, sometimes cancer, sometimes marriage, sometimes family issues, right? So a lot of us face different kind of issues and problems, and when we're given the opportunity to, or like when we know somebody's going to make hajj, like that's a great opportunity for us to seek dua and ask them to make dua for us when they're making hajj and when they're at Arafah. And it's a good way to encourage people. So I think one of the things that I've heard from others is when they see young people making hajj, they're like, man, like, it's like, that's like a really young couple. You know what I mean? Like, and it's really encouraging for other people when they see such young couples. I remember I was leading a hajj group one year, and there were just like a lot of younger couples there. And I was like really surprised. I'm like, man, like you know what I mean? Like we have that mental expectation that the people are a little bit older when they make their first hajj. And it's like, yeah, we've been married for like a year, or like, we've been married for like a couple of years, and we were given the opportunity, so we decided to take it, and we made hajj. So it's actually very encouraging to see that. And for those of you that haven't made hajj, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open the doors for you. And those that haven't, those have had made hajj, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it. So like we said, the most important element in this, when it comes to public actions, when it comes to public deeds, that we try to make sure that we are correcting our niyyah along the way. And the easiest way for us to correct our niyyah is to ask. Make sure that, again, it is something that is a regular part of the process. It can become very easy for us to fall into ritual and to fall into habit. And that's always a good way to always check back in with ourselves and be like, okay, hey, why am I doing this? And it's good. Like forming habits is good. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَحَبَّ الْأَعْمَالِ اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. He said that the most beloved actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones that are the most consistent, right, and most continuous. So building those positive habits are really important, but what can happen with habits is that it just becomes a habit, right? And it's something that we do without realizing. Sometimes it becomes very mindless and becomes very ritualistic. And it is in those moments we kind of have to remind ourselves on why it is that we're doing them. So if there are elements that I can parse out, and it can actually become, sometimes we look at worship as a whole unit, but there are sometimes elements of it that can be parsed out. And if we understand that there are some deeds that I have a choice, right? We talked about having that choice. I can do it publicly or I can do it privately. What should my scale look like? How do I determine, okay, in this situation, it's better for me to pray publicly, or is it better for me to pray privately? So in my home, I can go and pray in my bedroom, right? It's a very private place to pray. Is it better for me to pray maybe in the living room? What are some things I should look at to help me make that decision? Right? Okay, other people. If there are other people who are in the home, how would that affect my decision? If I live alone, it doesn't matter, right? where I pray. But let's say I live with a family. What would affect my decision of praying in a more public room versus me praying in my room myself? Okay, if if I want to encourage my kids, right? If I want to encourage my kids, then I should make an effort to pray publicly, and not just pray publicly, but maybe even get them involved. What else? It's the only way. What about situations? And I'm sure some of you might be familiar with this, where a person is either newly practicing or is a new Muslim, and the family is actually very anti-religious. Is it in my benefit to go and pray in the living room now? No. Why not? I'm sorry. Right. That's me making a statement. Right? If I'm going into the living room and I know that my family like dislikes this, or they'll be like, oh, he's becoming an extremist, or he's doing this, right? And I go and I'm like, I make a adhan, right? Like, I make a adhan, I make a iqama, and I pray. I'm not. Am I encouraging anyone? No, I'm actually discouraging because I'm actually being confrontational. And if I know that they don't like this, then it's probably something that I should avoid. And this goes back to a very important qaida, which is dar al-mafasid muqaddam ala jalb al-musalih, which basically means prevention of harm takes precedence over acquisition of benefits. So if I have to judge, if there are harms and there are benefits, I am first obligated to what? To remove the harm. Because there might be things that are beneficial. There's no doubt about that. So an example might be if let me think of an example. I'm on the subway, right? I'm riding the subway. You guys ever been to New York? Yeah. Right. Subway's pretty busy, right? It's a pretty busy spot, and I'm on the platform. Rush hour. Should I bust out my sajada and just start praying? It's like, well, there might be Muslims there, and I want to encourage the Muslims. Those are potential benefits, yes? What are the harms? Or there aren't any harms? Right, I might be inconveniencing other people. I'm sorry. Huh? What happened? Oh. I might empty out the subway, right? So there is a possibility that people are encouraged. People might be like, oh, look at this person, they're so righteous. You know what I mean? They might be inspired for that. But the reality is that a vast majority of the people will feel inconvenienced. Not just that. How focused is my prayer going to be if I have like hundreds of people walking in front of me and behind me? Right? These are all things that we should think about. Okay, what if it's toward the end of the prayer time? Like the first situation, I had time to pray, right? It's like, okay, it doesn't make sense for me to pray. I have to go. Like if it's toward the end of the prayer time, what should I do? Huh? Well, I should pray for sure. Like, but what should I do? Like, what should be part of my thinking process? I'm sorry? Try to find a space where I'm not inconveniencing other people. Because the Prophet ﷺ, one of the places he said that you shouldn't pray or you can't pray? The walkway. Or the path. Why? But people are using it, right? You're actually inconveniencing other people when you do that. You should avoid praying in the pathway. So what do? Find a place that is quiet. Find a place that's convenient. Because it'll help me with my prayer, and it won't inconvenience others. So this is like a very, very important qaida. It's a very important principle that's important for us to remember. That, okay, yes, there are harms, there are benefits. Priority, number one, remove the harms. And then number two, bring those things that are beneficial. And this even happens with certain relationships and alliances that we build, right? There might be certain political alliances that we build. There might be certain friendships that we have. These are things that we have to keep in mind. Is there number one, is it an actual benefit? Is it a perceived benefit? Sometimes we think of things, but it's important for us to understand that even when we make certain decisions, right? So we might have decisions in marriage, we might have decisions in jobs, we might have decisions in vacations, for example. Okay, let's sit down and let's look at the pros and cons. What if there's no harm? Like, what if it's equal, right? And I don't find any harm in this decision, and I can kind of go either way. So he says that there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars, that some will say regardless. Remember we had talked about initially that if I have a choice, there's always going to be an inclination toward privacy and hiding it. Others say secrecy is better than publicity, even though there's a role model in public display. And others say secrecy is better than publicity without a role model, but when there is a role model, publicity is better than secrecy. What's the difference between these two? Both of them agree on what? It's better to hide. All right, both of them agree on this. The only difference is say that one says it's better to hide if what? There's already a role model there. The other ones say, okay, well, if there is no role model, right, it's better to be public. So, for example, in a home, it might be like a shared family, and there are young kids that are there. Nobody prays in the house except you. So I am the only role model. In that situation, it might be better to what? Right, to pray. And nobody's getting hurt, right? Nobody feels it's annoying. Nobody feels like I'm being preachy, right? I'm not being like, extra about it, but it's good for people to see me pray. Maybe it might encourage them to pray. And what's amazing is that in many situations, in many families, that, especially situations where maybe people start practicing or, people come to Islam, for the family, when they look at this individual, what do they see? They see like this huge change, right? All of a sudden, this is a person I don't recognize anymore, which is natural. So what should I do if I feel my family is looking at me as somebody who's completely different, somebody who's completely changed? What should I make an effort to do? Sure. Well, number one, I should maintain my relationship. I agree with that 100%. Right? I should do the best I can in maintaining my relationship. What else? Right, I have to continue to respect them. There's no doubt. A lot of times what happens is that, especially like with young people, they start practicing and they can become very abrasive. Right? They become very pushy. They become very preachy. It's like, oh, you need to do this and you need to do that. It's not going to help. So then what should I do? Let's say I'm newly practicing, right? I just started practicing. My home, they're not really practicing like that. What are some efforts I can make? I'm sorry? Right, don't be extra about it. Don't be so overt with a lot of things, because the reality is that the parents, the family, they look at you and they're like, wow, you're completely changed. You're like 180 degrees of who you are. And if I just keep throwing those changes in their face, what happens? Right? It becomes discouraging, and they feel like they can no longer relate to me. And we need to understand, a lot of people will ask things like, okay, well, what if they celebrate this? What if they do that? And blah, blah, blah. Then, okay, here, weigh the relationship. Is me avoiding this action or engaging in this action, is that going to hurt or benefit the relationship? I mean, the number one criteria is is this a Shari'i violation or not? Right? This is very clear. So I have sometimes new Muslims, my parents are having a Christmas party, blah, blah, blah. It's like, or are they going to celebrate Jesus? Well, no, right? That's usually doesn't happen in those situations. I say, but why are they having it? Well, they just want to have a family get together and they want to eat together. Right? So number one, there's no Shari'i violation, right? If the family wants to get together and eat, is that haram? No, it's not. The purpose of it is for the family to get together. And if we understand that, and it's going to benefit the relationship. So if this is the decision-making process, should I go or not? I should go. What if there's alcohol that's being served? I'm sorry? Right? Then you don't stay for the whole time. You stay for 20 minutes, right? 2 drinks and they're done. So, but again, it's a matter of understanding how to balance some of these relationships, understanding that, okay, I'm not, because I'm practicing in this way or in this form, it doesn't mean I'm inaccessible. I still am who I am, right? I'm still the same person. I'm still your son, or I'm still your friend. I'm still this, but my values have changed, right? And that's something that I think is easy to understand, that my values have changed, but I still am who I am. I'm still an individual. I still have certain characteristics. I still have certain tastes, right? I still have certain likes, and all of that stuff's okay. But we should learn to be as least abrasive as possible when it comes to dealing with others. So this idea of having a role model, sometimes it can be encouraging, and it's important for us to understand when it is encouraging. So if I accepted Islam and I've come into my house, and my parents now is like, man, he's a lot more respectful than he was before. So subhanAllah, this actually happened with one of my friends. He had actually come out of jail, so you already know he has a rough back. I think he actually went to jail for like armed robbery, and he was like dealing drugs, and like he was like a really bad guy. He became Muslim. He stopped doing all those things, and he started dealing with his mom, where he actually like started respecting her. Right, he used to talk back to her and used to like cuss her out. All of a sudden, he started respecting her, and she's like, "What is going on? Like, who are you? This is not the kid I raised." And subhanallah, it took time. I think it took about maybe 8 to 10 years. Eventually, she became Muslim. Right? She accepted. Eventually, she accepted Islam. It and she was like, yeah, "Wow, this is such a positive change. Like these are such amazing changes that I'm seeing in you, and all because you accepted Islam." And like I said, alhamdulillah, she eventually accepted Islam. Um, so does that always happen? No, right? That's not always the case, but there are cases where it does. And if we're able to set those good examples, set those role models, I think that's something that's important. On the other side, he was so bad, his father wanted nothing to do with him. Unfortunately, that's still the case today, right? Like I think he's tried reaching out a couple times and tried finding him, but he just hasn't been able to. So, there's always going to be situations where there's pros and cons, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy. And he uses the example here saying that, okay, if there's no role model, then you should be the one to model those actions. And the examples he uses are the prophets and the messengers. Did they ever hide stuff? No. They were actually prohibited from hiding. Right? They were prohibited from hiding actions. Any order, any prohibition, they had to share it. They had to state it. If there was an action that they were supposed to do, they had to model it. If there was someplace that they had to go and do that. They had no choice in the issue. This is the importance of having that role model. This is the importance of setting that stage. This is the importance of modeling for others. Ibn Umar, radiallahu anh, he narrates that private actions are better than public ones. Public actions are better when they are meant to encourage. And this is just a general rule of thumb, right? It doesn't mean that this is always the case. Sometimes there are situations and cases where it is better to model. This hadith, anyway, in and of itself is weak, but I think the meaning is generally sound. And because if there are cases of where riyā is possible, yes, absolutely. So if I know for sure that this is something that will lead to riyā, then it's something that should be avoided. But sometimes there are cases where you actually find more sincerity in that. So a father with his children, right? Or, a mother with her children. They actually are striving to set good examples for their kids. And the chances of riyā in modeling behaviors in those situations are actually very, very limited. Sometimes depending on the relationship that we have with people, right? There are certain people I'm never going to look for status for you. I only want to see your success. So I think that's a good gauge of kind of how we deal with certain situations. If I know someone who the only thing I care about is their success, then in those situations it's completely reasonable to model, because the chances of me falling into riyā are what? It's very, very little, because I'm not looking to gain status with that person. Just like with my children, yeah, I hope they respect me, and I hope, they deal with me in a good way. But when I'm doing certain actions, if I'm fasting, if I'm praying, right, if I'm giving sadaqah, if I'm doing those things, I'm hoping that they will actually model those behaviors and they actually imitate me, right? Because I want to set a good model for them. Because I want them to imitate me. Why? Because I want them to be good Muslims. So I think riyā in those situations is very difficult to fall into, which is why I feel like, it's in general, it's a good rule of thumb, but with the caveat that is there a fear of riyā or not? Right? I think if we understand that and we have that caveat there, it becomes a lot easier for us to gauge on how we want to engage and deal with different actions. So whoever intends to display their actions, they should remember two important things. Right? There are two important considerations that they should keep in mind. Where they know, it will be encouraging. So if I want to publicly do an action, I need to make sure that I understand that where this will be encouraging. I can't just be like, oh, this is going to be encouraging without knowing who is going to feel or be encouraged. Secondly, you should continuously monitor our intentions, and that's important. A lot of times we forget. It becomes really easy to fall into that. We get so caught up in saying like, oh, I want to model good behavior, I want to do good things, I want people to see that I can do this too. A lot of times this will be like working in certain spheres. It's like, no, I can get into politics and I can keep being a good Muslim, or I can keep my values, or I can enter, certain spaces and I can still keep my values and I can still be a good Muslim. And yeah, I don't disagree. I think that's very much possible, but we should never overlook our own weaknesses, because it's very easy to become susceptible to them. And it becomes very easy for us to like destroy our actions. For what? Right? Because we underestimated ourselves or we overestimated ourselves. These things it's very dangerous. I should never put myself in a situation where I have overestimated myself. And it's important for me to kind of build up my own personal spiritual stamina to figure out where I'm at, where I'm going, the direction I'm trying to head in, so that I can try to better myself. He also presents like a proximity or an encouragement rubric. Like, how do you kind of gauge that? Like, what is a good way of gauging that? So what's interesting here is that the first people, if I'm going to show my actions and be public with them, the first group of people should be who? My family. And again, it's amazing how this is very much in line with some things that we were talking about, that the susceptibility for riyā, it increases as you move further away from the family. Why? Mm-hmm. Right? Because I'm invested, right? I'm invested in their success. And these are the people who I'm invested in their success. So family makes sense. Neighbors, why is that? And when we talk about neighbors in Islam, who does that actually mean? Does it mean like the physical people next to me? Huh? It can be your peers, possibly. But in general, it's talking about the community. Like when you talk about like hukuk al-jar, like your neighbor's rights and stuff, it's usually talking about your community. And for the community around me, right? So if I have neighbors who live in my neighborhood, I come to a particular masjid, what do I hope for the neighborhood? Right, I hope good. Why do I want the neighborhood to be successful? Am I happy with a neighborhood that has graffiti, selling drugs, right? There's shootouts. Would I be happy with that neighborhood? Right, because in the community success, guess who else succeeds? I do. Right, so if I invest in that community and I see it grow, and a lot of times you'll see communities be revamped, you'll have community watches, you'll have all these things. Why? Because people want to keep that community safe, because they're essentially part of that community, right? So they want to see success in it. And if I'm in a space or I'm in a place where I don't care about what's going on with the people around me, well, that's a different problem, right? That's a different issue. And I need to ask myself, is this a good place for me to be? The people at the market, right? Though when he says people at the market, he's talking about who? He's just talking about the public at large. Right? He's talking about strangers. How invested are we in strangers? Not really, right? Do I want strangers to get hurt? No, like I don't want people to get hurt, but I'm not also invested in them. Right? I'm not invested in their problems. I'm not invested in their issues, because the chances of those issues, problems having an effect on me, having an effect on my family, having an effect on my community are small, right? So I think it's very, even with this proximity thing, it's like an investment rubric. Like I'm most invested in my family, then I'm invested in my community, then I'm invested with people at large. Also, what is your status? Alhamdulillah. There, like, what is your status? I was like, oh man, did I bore you guys already? But like, do you have status or recognition in the community? Why is he throwing that into the mix? Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Okay. So that's definitely possible. if I have higher status, what are the chances of me seeking more status if I already have position? It's still there, right? It's still there because maybe I want to maintain it, but sure, they still look for more opportunities, looking to get more money, and somebody who is extremely popular is still looking to get more popular. But if somebody's used to being in the public light and used to being in the public sphere, it's very possible that the chances of them doing an action publicly will have a less of an effect of them falling into possibility. Yeah. So if a person is used to leading prayers, for example, and then he's praying publicly, right? For him, it's normal, right? That's become his norm. For a person who is wealthy and is known to be generous, right? People come and ask him for money, and he gives them money, right? Is the possibility still there? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Right? No, nobody's denying that. But the chances are lower, or they can be lower, for a person in such position. Also, there's a sense of responsibility. So if a person is possibly a community leader, how much more responsibility does he have in showing or permitting or allowing or doing certain things? So it can become a teaching moment. So all of these things need to be considered when we talk about when should I encourage? Because I might have I might be a mentor, right? And there's somebody young who is my mentee. And sometimes I'll do an action just to show what? Just to show that it's okay, right? It's okay for you to do this action. It's okay for you to engage in this action. So I think these are some things that we'll keep in mind. Unfortunately, the AC isn't working in the musalla, so we're actually praying. We'll be praying Maghrib here, inshallah. So I do want to end class a little bit early today. It's a little bit earlier than I had planned, but I think people are going to start coming in for Maghrib, inshallah, and I don't want to disturb them. I don't want to disturb anyone's sleep either. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Inshallah, I'll see all of you next week. Jazakum khair. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin. Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.